Here we go. The Subcommittee of Highways and Transit will come to order. I ask unanimous consent that the chairman be authorized to declare a recess at any time during today's hearing without objection. So ordered. I also ask unanimous consent that the members not on the subcommittee be permitted to sit with the subcommittee at today's hearing and ask questions without objection. So ordered. As a reminder, if members wish to insert a document into the record, please also email that to documentsti@mail.house.gov. Now recognize myself for the purposes of an opening statement. We're here today to examine the Department of Transportation's regulatory and administrative agenda with respect to the modal administrations under this subcommittee's jurisdiction. Since President Biden took office, we've heard frequently from stakeholders spanning all regions and industries about the burden of this administration's onerous regulatory agenda. An analysis by the National Association of Manufacturers found that across the board, federal regulations cost the United States economy more than $3 trillion. Yet the administration continues to march forward with crushing regulations, including those that exceed its statutory authority. The Federal Highway Administration continues to pursue its final rule to force a greenhouse gas performance measure on state departments of transportation and metropolitan planning organizations, despite lacking the statutory authority to do so. As I've said many times in this subcommittee, this policy was considered and disposed of during negotiations in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Two federal courts issued opinions earlier this year finding the rule exceeds the administration's statutory authority. The United States District Court for the Northern District of Texas went so far as to vacate the rule. Concerns have been repeatedly raised in this subcommittee about the administration's unauthorized actions, including concerns that this rule would put the thumb on the scale and potentially influence project selection. This rule would be particularly disastrous for rural areas whose communities can't build a subway or bike lanes to cut emissions. Yet the administration is squandering valuable resources to appeal both rulings. Unfortunately, this isn't the only example we've seen of the department using executive action to advance the progressive agenda it wishes had been included in OOIDA. For example, in December 2021, the Federal Highway Administration released a policy memo which, among other things, sought to encourage states to prioritize non-motorized modes in transit, as well as update existing infrastructure over developing new capacity projects. Many called on federal highways to rescind that memo, specifically citing confusion as the memo ran counter to OOIDA, as well as concerns with the administration's process and lack of public notice or comment period. Thankfully, after several members of this committee raised our significant concerns, Federal Highways did the right thing and superseded its own memo. Going forward, we must retain the ability of individual states to prioritize projects and address their wide-ranging and unique needs. Similarly troubling, we've heard concerns from businesses that they're being hamstrung by ambiguity and lack of clarity surrounding regulations. This so-called Inflation Reduction Act provided $4.5 billion for Biden administration's Buy Clean initiative to allow the General Services Administration and federal highways to pilot low-embodied carbon programs. There's been confusion about the material requirement differences between GSA and federal highways, as well as lack of transparency for the Environmental Product Declaration, or EPD, collection. I remain concerned that the Biden administration is pushing the market without considering the actual life cycle of the materials in construction projects. Likewise, rules and regulations continue to be considered that mandate certain technologies that may not be ready for mass adoption, particularly as it relates to the trucking sector. This can stifle the safe and efficient movement of freight, have safety implications on other roadway users, and may needlessly increase costs for consumers. I appreciate our witnesses being here to discuss their thoughts on the administration's regulatory agenda and look forward to hearing their perspectives. I now recognize Ranking Member Holmes Norton for 5 minutes for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to thank Subcommittee Chair Rick Crawford for holding this hearing on transportation regulations. The Department of Transportation is a crucial partner in Congress in implementing the laws we write. The technical expertise within the department educates and informs Congress in writing laws and fills in gaps through rules and guidance. The department and its agencies are tasked with issuing rules to fight climate change, improve safety and air quality, provide transparency and reduce fraud in federally funded projects, and standardize the design of roads and bridges to ensure their structural integrity. In short, the department's regulatory role is to ensure the safe and efficient movement of people and goods across our transportation systems. This is no small task. Roughly every 5 years, Congress gives the department's agencies dozens of new rule makings to develop and direct them to update or modify existing ones. Additionally, the agencies regularly accept petitions to develop rules from the public. This process is key to our democracy. It provides avenues for every citizen, lawmaker, and stakeholder to provide input into the rulemaking process. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act tasks the department with several rulemakings of interest. I would like to speak today about those that will improve safety for all users of our roadways. The law required the Federal Highway Administration to update the standards for street design, which is particularly important as cities work to reduce pedestrian and bicyclist fatalities. The agency has also issued guidance to states on how to incorporate vulnerable road user safety assessments into their safety programs. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration is required by infrastructure law to develop regulations to ensure cars are equipped with impaired driving prevention technology to avoid fatalities from drunk driving. The infrastructure law also directed the department to finalize several rules designed to improve safety in the trucking industry. Fatalities involving large truck crashes have risen 76% in the last 15 years. Since 2010, the number of trucks involved in fatal crashes on roads with speed limits of 75 miles per hour or more saw a 440% increase. The department has already issued a final rule requiring truck trailers to have rear impact guards to provide protection to passenger vehicle occupants. The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration is still working to finalize a rule to require automatic emergency brakes on heavy-duty vehicles. The administration's proposed rule regarding these brakes is projected to prevent nearly 25,000 crashes and save 155 lives each year. I urge the administration to move forward to finish this rulemaking. Finally, I want to note the importance of Congress and the administration in hearing from multiple points of view when it comes to improving safety. Every road user cares about safety. Traveling by car, truck, bike, or foot remains one of the riskiest things we can do on a day-to-day basis. It is imperative that we address safety issues from all perspectives and listen to those impacted. No one person or stakeholder has all the answers, but I believe collectively we can take a stronger approach to reducing injuries and fatalities. I look forward to working with my colleagues on improving the safety of our transportation system, and I thank the witnesses for their testimony today.
Now recognize Ranking Member of the Full Committee, Mr. Larson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Crawford and Ranking Member Norton, for holding this hearing today on the Department of Transportation's regulatory agenda. Members of Congress are motivated to serve on this committee for lots of reasons. Whether your interest in transportation includes reducing traffic fatalities, helping U.S. businesses compete in the global economy, combating pollution, creating jobs, or making transportation work for more communities, regulations do play a role in meeting these goals. While Congress writes the laws, federal agencies turn these legislative proposals into the rules of the road that can be followed and enforced. Federal agencies have professionals, engineers, planners, and economists who bring their expertise to bear to make our transportation systems work seamlessly. This DOT, under the leadership of Secretary Buttigieg, is implementing policies to make our transportation systems cleaner, greener, safer, and more accessible. And as the administration continues to implement the BIL, this committee will continue our oversight to ensure the regulations are consistent with the law and with congressional intent. We continue to have a roadway safety crisis, with a total of 42,795 people killed in traffic crashes on U.S. roadways in 2022. Nearly 6,000 of those people were killed in crashes involving large trucks, including 85 people from Washington State. The BIL took steps towards ending these preventable fatalities, including by requiring rear underride guards and automatic emergency brakes for commercial motor vehicles. Today we'll hear testimony from the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association, whose members are frontline workers with a vested interest in safety, and it's critical we listen to the voices of those directly impacted by truck safety standards. It's equally important that we listen to those whose lives have been devastated by the loss of a loved one in a traffic crash. And I applaud the tireless work of transportation safety advocates who help hold Congress and the administration to account as we work to make our roadways safer. We continue to have a climate crisis, and transportation emissions are increasing. Transportation is the largest emitter of carbon pollution in the U.S., and 80% of those emissions come from cars and light-duty trucks. The Biden administration's greenhouse gas performance measure was a small but important attempt to address climate change. But we cannot solve what we do not measure, and while this particular rule has been struck down, asking states to track carbon emissions on their roadways and set non-binding goals to reduce emissions is not an unreasonable ask as part of a system where states control hundreds of billions of dollars and have the flexibility to spend them however they see fit, including on highway expansions. Ignoring the link between transportation and climate change will not prevent roadways from being washed out during storms, pavements from buckling under extreme heat, or tunnels from flooding during a hurricane. So I look forward to the testimony from Transportation for America on how we can chart a better path forward. Clear, consistent rules save time, save money, and certainly save lives. They underpin our ability to travel freely, for businesses to ship their goods to market, and for people with differing abilities to access the transportation systems that they need to get around. While we may differ on the details of individual rules, I hope we can agree that consistent, reliable funding for infrastructure and data-driven rules to guide the build-out and the use of that infrastructure is key to safety and the economy. So with that, I'll yield back and want to thank the witnesses for being here and look forward to our discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Larson. And now I'd like to welcome our witnesses and thank them for being here today. Before we get started, I want to take a quick minute to explain our lighting system. It seems pretty self-explanatory. 3 lights, much like a traffic light in front of you. Green means go, but unlike a stoplight, yellow does not mean slow down and proceed with caution, as you might expect. It actually means hurry up because it's fixing to turn red. When it turns red, you might hear one of these little numbers, which is a reminder to conclude your remarks quickly. So when it does turn red, like I said, you might hear a little tap. I ask unanimous consent that the witness's full statements be included in the record without objection so ordered. I also ask unanimous consent that the record of today's hearing remain open until such time as our witnesses have provided answers to any questions that may be submitted to them in writing without objection so ordered. I also ask unanimous consent that the record remain open for 15 days for any additional comments and information submitted by members or witnesses to be included in the record of the day's hearing without objection so ordered. As your written testimony has been made part of the record, the subcommittee asks that you limit your oral remarks to 5 minutes. With that, Mr. Dewitt, you are recognized for 5 minutes for your testimony.
Good morning, Chairman Crawford, Ranking Member Norton, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me to appear in my role as chair of the American Road and Transportation Builders Association. ARTBA's public and private sector members design, build, and maintain the nation's transportation network. I am also president of Dewitt Construction, based in Edmond, Oklahoma. We are a family-owned heavy highway concrete, asphalt, and bridge construction company with around 700 employees. Before I address the regulatory matters at the heart of today's hearing, let me note that the increased investment levels in the 2021 infrastructure law are supporting an overdue modernization of America's transportation network. States have initiated 75,000 improvements with at least one federal aid highway and bridge project in nearly every U.S. county. In Oklahoma, 1,600 projects are taking shape. The infrastructure law is also helping with job creation. Nationally, 43,000 new construction industry jobs have been added since 2021. Another key part of the infrastructure story is the federal agencies implementing a maze of policy changes. Regulatory proposals that are clear and well-defined can achieve their intended purpose. For example, when the Federal Highway Administration recently proposed updates to its work zone regulations, we were pleased to see greater emphasis on the need for positive separation between workers and motorists. It will help improve safety for everyone. In other instances, however, while the road to regulation is paved with good intentions, the outcomes can cause uncertainty and a lack of clarity for the companies working on transportation projects. My written testimony addresses numerous areas for regulatory reform that are worthy of additional oversights by this subcommittee. In the interest of time, I will address 4 of them. The first relates to what constitutes waters of the United States. If a project includes a roadside ditch, is a Clean Water Act permit required? This should be an easy answer, but unfortunately it's not. The definition has bounced back and forth like a ping pong ball with different proposals from the last 3 different presidential administrations. Years of litigation led to a definitive clarification by the United States Supreme Court, but federal agencies have not yet fully complied. So more than a decade of uncertainty, confusion, and frustration continues for transportation builders. Second, ARTBA fully supports congressional intent to strengthen domestic manufacturing. However, we continue to see inconsistencies and uncertainties in the Buy America implementation. The Federal Highway Administration has proposed to roll back its Buy America waiver for manufactured products. This would require contractors to dissect electronic, mechanical, and other items incorporated into projects and document the origin of thousands of small, inexpensive components. To prevent unnecessary cost increases and project disruptions, ARTBA supports continuation of the existing waiver. Third, while we work to comply with other IIJA changes, we are also contending with unexpected regulations that are not part of the law, like a rule requiring a greenhouse gas performance measure. This measure was debated and deliberately left out of the bipartisan IIJA, yet the current administration finalized their rule in December, and now litigation is ongoing. Fourth, the Fish and Wildlife Service is preparing to tighten protections against accidental harming of migratory birds. While contractors aim to safeguard wildlife on or near project sites, a rule that imposes a rigid and unpredictable requirement could result in work stoppages every time these types of birds appear in the area. In closing, let me say that historic levels of infrastructure investment, when accompanied by the harmonious regulatory environment intended by Congress, can result in timely completion of transportation projects that move people and products safely and efficiently. We look forward to our continued collaboration with Congress to achieve this goal. Thanks again for the opportunity to be here today. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Bell, you're recognized.
Good morning, Chairman Crawford, Ranking Member Norton, and distinguished members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to share ideas with you today. My name is Philip Bell. I'm president of the Steel Manufacturers Association. The SMA is the largest U.S. trade association for steel. Our members are investing in the future. Between 2022 and 2026, they will have invested more than $20 billion, leading the way in the electrification, modernization, job creation, and further decarbonization of America's steel industry, which is already the cleanest in the world. As the Federal Highway Administration implements its Buy Clean program, it must promote low-emission steelmaking and adhere to statutory requirements established by Congress. A little background might be helpful. There are currently 2 ways to make steel. The traditional blast furnace production method is a centuries-old, coal-based, high-emissions way of making steel. By contrast, SMA members use recycling-based electric arc furnaces to manufacture steel with an emissions profile 70% lower than traditional producers. EAFs are inherently more efficient and lower emitting, which is why virtually every new U.S. steel mill built in the last 50 years has been an electric furnace. EAF production dominates the steel used in our nation's infrastructure, including 99% of all domestic rebar, wire rod, light shapes, wire mesh, and structural beams. Electric furnaces and blast furnaces can make the same grades and types of steel. The finished products from either method are identical. From a customer perspective, the type of steel production process does not matter. America's reliance on EAF production gives us a significant carbon advantage over our global competition. In fact, the domestic steel industry emits 75 to 320% less carbon than global producers. So why does this carbon emissions advantage matter? The IRA appropriated more than $4 billion to the GSA and Federal Highway Administration to purchase construction materials that have substantially lower levels of embodied greenhouse gas emissions. The EPA defines substantially lower to mean products with the lowest 20% of emissions. SMA believes that a well-designed Buy Clean program can meaningfully accelerate decarbonization and assist in securing a stable future for the American steel industry and its workers. However, we have serious concerns with the GSA's implementation of its Buy Clean program and their adoption of a dual emissions standard for steel. We urge that Federal Highway reject GSA's misguided approach. For multiple steel product categories, GSA has set separate emission standards for steel products simply based on how they are made. Under this dual standard, steel produced from blast furnaces will be subject to more lenient requirements than those made in modern electric furnaces, despite an identical end product. This is contrary to the Buy Clean statute, which requires that only materials with substantially lower emissions be purchased. This market-distorting action discriminates against companies and workers that have invested heavily and worked tirelessly to reach substantially lower emission levels. GSA justifies this dual standard by claiming that electric furnaces cannot produce all the same types and grades of steel, and that there will be an insufficient supply of recycled scrap to support greater EAF production. Both claims are wrong. First, there is simply no dispute that electric furnaces can produce the grades and types of steel needed for construction projects and government procurement. Second, recent data by the OECD shows that global scrap surpluses will exist through at least 2050. In fact, the United States has so much steel scrap that we are a net exporter. GSA did not have a legitimate reason to set two standards, and neither does the Federal Highway Administration. To conclude, a single standard is simple and transparent. A single standard is fair to all producers and encourages innovation and investment. A single standard results in the greatest emissions reductions and will further our global advantage on low-emission steel. And finally, a single standard is the only way to comply with the statute. Thank you for inviting me to testify today, and I look forward to continued engagement with members of the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Bell. Mr. Pugh.
Chairman Crawford, Ranking Member Holmes Norton, and members of the subcommittee. I'm Louis Pugh, and I'm a proud trucker. I also serve as the Executive Vice President of the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. I laid out my career as a trucker in the United States Army. After that, I spent 23 years driving a truck as a small business motor carrier, amassing 2.5 million safe miles across this country. Still hold my CDL today. OOIDA is the largest trade association representing small business truckers and professional drivers across the country. We have 150,000 members in all 50 states who operate collectively 240,000 pieces of equipment. OOIDA promotes and protects the interests of our members. on issues impacting economic well-being, working conditions, and safe operation of a commercial motor vehicle. Small trucking businesses account for 96% of all registered motor carriers in the U.S., and they are undoubtedly the safest and most diverse operators on the road. Trucking is one of the most heavily regulated industries in America. From the number of hours you can drive, to the color and width of tape that you must put on your trailer, to even when you can go home, every element of trucking is controlled by regulation. Complying with existing regulations, many of which have no connection to safety, can be overwhelming, and even for the most experienced drivers, in some cases it's damn near impossible. While compliance rates have never been higher, there are those, including large motor carriers, shippers, safety advocates, and elected officials, along with bureaucrats, who not only resist in modernizing or eliminating needless regulations, but want to impose even more rules on the American trucker. Some folks want to mandate speed limiters on all commercial vehicles while dismissing the disastrous consequences and concerns of highway safety and supply chain issues. Others with no experience in a commercial motor vehicle want to mandate the use of unproven and cost-prohibitive equipment like side underride guards. Unfortunately, these examples only scratch the surface. If this is painting a picture of a dysfunctional regulatory environment where practical solutions have become secondary considerations, you are starting to see things like an OOIDA member. Let me be clear, OOIDA and our members are not anti-regulation. We have a long history of supporting regulations that address critical needs in our industry and are backed by sound research and data. We have pushed for enhanced driver training requirements, improved broker transparency, stronger truck leasing rules, and better driver pay, and more accurate and reliable safety rating system. Unfortunately, Congress and DOT have an inconsistent record when it comes to crafting regulations. Even members of this subcommittee have demonstrated inconsistency when it comes to developing regulations that support truckers and highway safety. On a positive note, Ranking Member Holmes Norton has championed a bipartisan legislation to fight freight fraud, and Representative Van Drew has introduced a bipartisan bill to eliminate the overtime exemption, to ensure drivers are paid for all the hours that they work. In contrast, other lawmakers, at the behest of trial lawyers, have continued to push a massive 500% increase in liability insurance minimums, despite knowing the existing minimum covers the cost of 99% of crashes. Even the Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act provided a mixed bag for truckers. On one hand, Congress included provisions to combat predatory leasing. On the other, the bill authorized an overly ambitious automatic emergency braking mandate. It has also created an underride committee dominated by blatantly biased participants who failed in their mission to generate a consensus on the ways to reduce underride crashes, fatalities, and injuries. While Congress's records features positives and negatives aspects, truckers are completely frustrated with DOT's regulatory actions, mostly concerning the department's wildly unpopular and dangerous speed limiter mandate, its efforts to water down CDL requirements, the slow pace of addressing broker transparency, and improving the National Consumer Complaint Database. In the end, truckers want regulations that reflect their needs and the changing dynamics of their industry. It's time for Congress and DOT to help make trucking an appealing, safe, and sustainable career by listening to the people who make their living behind the wheel. And thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Pugh. Ms. Osborne, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Crawford and Ranking Member Norton, for inviting me to today's hearing. As a former staffer for a T&I member, it's really fun to be here for once. I am the Director of Transportation for America. Our vision is a transportation system that connects people to jobs and essential services no matter how they travel, no matter a person's financial means or their physical ability. My team works with states and localities across the country that have the same vision. We analyze trends in the transportation system and current investments, and we have consistently found a gap between what the taxpayers are promised and what is delivered through the Surface Transportation Program. The current approach allows agencies to prioritize expansion at the expense of repair, permits roadway designs that have proven dangerous, and puts people farther away from the places they need to go. What is frustrating to me, who has been part of 5 reauthorizations and is gearing up for my 6th, is that very failure is often the rallying cry for more money to be poured into the same programs. This is a country of such creativity and innovation, and yet we apply so little of it to the Surface Transportation Program. I want to see that change. Congress has given transportation agencies very broad latitude, but has not provided new tools, clear goals, or accountability to the taxpayer. For example, states and metropolitan planning organizations are required to set targets for the number and rate of roadway fatalities and serious injuries, including a target for the number of non-motorized fatalities and serious injuries. In our latest report on the danger that those walking face on our roadways, Dangerous by Design, we found that 13 states are currently setting a target for more fatalities and serious injuries than the year before. Even if they exceed that elevated target, there is no real penalty. There's another category of targets that Congress calls performance of the national highway system, an undefined and extremely broad term. US DOT has included greenhouse gas emissions as one of those performance targets. What happens if a state misses their targets? Not a thing. Some claim that under this rule, there will never be another highway built or expanded. But in Colorado, they have a more powerful regulation that requires projects that increase emissions to be paired with projects that will counter that increase. And guess what? They are building and expanding highways in Colorado. Also, interestingly, our research finds that greenhouse gas emissions from transportation overwhelmingly come from urban areas. More rural states are actually doing quite well. In general, we should not be just setting targets at all, but also rewarding agencies for performing well and providing greater direction and support for those failing to progress. On individual projects, agencies make big promises, but rarely have to look back and see whether or not the projects they have built performed as intended. Imagine what we could learn and improve if we did. Back to safety, we've already heard the safety numbers, I believe, from Chairman Lawson, but in 2022, 46,027 people died in motor vehicle crashes compared to 32,782 in 2012, 10 years ago, or 10 years before. That is a trend that is not only awful, it is at odds with our peer nations. One reason for that is we have a one-size-fits-all approach to designing our major roadways. We built the interstate system to accommodate high-speed vehicle movement because we knew it was impossible to do so safely on our surface roads due to conflict, street parking, cross streets, driveways, and people. But over the last 70 years, we have brought interstate speeds to many of our surface roads. Speed and conflict are a dangerous combination. Even at the speed limit, speeds are often too high for a driver to see and anticipate a conflict and react. When a driver inevitably fails, we blame them. We can certainly provide and prepare drivers more to behave safely and penalize those that don't. But if we had better roadway design, we wouldn't have to, certainly not as much. And if Congress and the agencies funded by Congress participated more in safer design of our system, the users of it might not chafe as much at being regulated themselves. We could also make personal vehicle design safer, getting rid of preposterous problems like big front blind spots. We all have a role to play. I know I sound negative, but it's because I know we can do so much better. I hope we can talk about using guidance and regulation in a way that would support better outcomes and more accountability. Thanks again for having me, and I look forward to hearing your ideas and receiving your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Osborne. Prior to beginning member questioning, I'd like to make our witness panel aware that votes are anticipated to be called at 10:30 a.m. this morning. If this occurs, the subcommittee may enter into a brief recess. However, witnesses should be prepared to resume the hearing when the subcommittee reconvenes. Thank you. Again, thank you all for your testimony. We'll now turn to questions from the panel. I recognize myself to begin. Mr. Dewitt, in your written testimony, you outlined the American Road and Transportation Builders Association opposition to Federal Highway Administration's final rule to create a greenhouse gas performance measure, in addition to citing the administration's lack of statutory authority to promulgate such a regulation. Your testimony says, quote, "This rule could impinge on state flexibility to select projects," end quote. Could you expand on that and explain to this subcommittee what that means and what's at stake here?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you, Chairman Crawford. The rule requires state and local agencies to plan projects that meet the intended greenhouse gas goals or, at a minimum, contribute to declining greenhouse gas targets. This means that states and other transportation agencies may need to prioritize certain types of projects over others if they do not align with the prescribed GHG reduction targets. The concern is that this could lead to a misallocation of resources, hinder state-specific transportation needs, and undermine the flexibility that states have traditionally enjoyed in selecting and prioritizing transportation projects.
Thank you, Mr. Dewitt. As co-chair of the Congressional Steel Caucus, it's important to me that this country has strong Buy America standards in place and supports the domestic production of steel as well as other construction materials. The Buy Clean initiative encourages manufacturers to adopt cleaner, low-carbon processes and publish environmental product declarations, or EPDs. Mr. Bell, I've heard from constituents that there's confusion surrounding the department's rollout of its low-carbon transportation materials program and no final decision on what the material requirements would be. Does SMA have concerns with that program?
Thank you, Congressman Crawford, and we appreciate your leadership and support of the steel industry. Yes, the SMA has serious problems with it because it is not clear as to where we're going to end up here. You have one approach that's being adopted by the General Services Administration, and then you have Federal Highway that, to their credit, is taking a more collaborative approach and working with industry and other subject matter experts to determine what their Buy Clean policy will be. The fact of the matter is there should be existing EDPs for various product categories, and if you have the right EPD, it'll show you what the emissions is and whether the steel is clean or not.
Thank you, Mr. Bell. I will yield the balance of my time and recognize Ranking Member Norton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Pugh, in your testimony, you expressed your strong support for a bipartisan bill that I sponsored with Congressman Ezell, H.R. 8505, the Household Goods Shipping Consumer Protection Act, restores the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration's authority to issue civil penalties against bad actors and enhance registration criteria. How would this bill benefit small business truckers and root out fraudulent actors in the freight industry?
Yes, thank you, Ranking Member. Yes, this would be very helpful to our industry. Small business carriers, it's almost at a crisis level now with broker and fraud. And what we can see from this is it would give FMCSA some teeth to go after these bad actors and these fraudsters, because that's one thing that they are lacking. This is the first step to give it. Secondly, motor carriers forever have been required to have a physical address. These fraudsters and these brokers have not been. This will make brokers and these folks have to have a physical address, which every one of my members that I have seen that's gotten hit with one of these fraudsters has been at like a UPS box or some sort of fake mailbox or something like that. We firmly believe that some of this stuff is even coming from other countries across the globe. So yes, this is a very good bill, and we much appreciate your support in bringing this forward to help our members. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Osborne, far too many people are dying on our roadways. Your testimony highlights that the United States has the worst road safety statistics compared to other developed, to every other developed nation. How do the regulations governing road design and traffic control limit our ability to build safer and more accessible roads?
I appreciate that question. I will start by stealing from my friend and colleague at Strong Towns, Chuck Marone, who wrote a book I highly recommend called Confessions of a Recovering Engineer, who points out that we try to make our roadways do everything, and therefore they kind of do everything poorly. If we want a roadway to accommodate high-speed travel by vehicles, we need to regulate all points of entrance and exit. We need to clear that roadway of vulnerable users and of development. There shouldn't be crossroads, there shouldn't be parking, there shouldn't be driveways. If we want that roadway to be servicing of local businesses and neighborhoods, there are going to be lots of conflict points, and therefore speeds need to be slow. We try to do a hybrid of the two, where we have high speed and conflict, and that leads to deadly conflict and consequences. We also should set speed limits based on the speed we want to see and design the roadway accordingly, rather than the way we do it now, which is we provide wiggle room so that people, if they do speed, can more safely do so, meaning that if they lose control of their vehicle, that they have wiggle room. That added speed added space encourages speeding, and then when enough people speed, we raise the speed limit. That is backwards, and while there has been recent flexibility for states and transportation agencies to do something different, there's been no guidance, so you can choose the traditional way where there's a lot of guidance, or you can make things up on your own. That's just not the right way to go about creating a safe design. And finally, I'll say we need to reward those that make progress in safety and manage those who are not doing well, set more limitations on how they spend their dollars and make them be more accountable for it. We definitely should not spend $50 billion a year for these bad results.
Ms. Osborne, your testimony also discusses the lack of accountability and transparency in the federal highway program. You note that even non-binding information gathering efforts are fought in the courts and in the Congress. Can you discuss the need for greater accountability and transparency in how states spend taxpayer dollars?
Yes, I will just say quickly that we've done polling that shows a break in people's faith in what the Surface Transportation Program produces, and that's because of past failures and lack of accountability. And if we want to be able to put more money into this program, we're going to have to close that gap.
Gentleman's time's expired. The gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Stauber.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I wanted to take just a couple minutes of my time. Mr. Bell, in your statements, you say the steel industry is a wonderful and glorious industry that has built careers, companies, communities, cities, and even civilizations. You still agree with that statement?
Yes.
Further down in that same paragraph, you say, modernization and further decarbonization of American steel industry, comma, which is already the cleanest in the world. Do you still agree with that statement?
Yes.
Okay. Do you know which district I represent in Minnesota?
Yeah, you're in the Iron Range, aren't you, Congressman Stauber? Yes.
I am. Mr. Bell, I am extremely offended at your comments here today in your written statements. Trying to reduce the steel making of the blast furnaces. I can assure you, if we had a representative of U.S. Steel in Cleveland Cliffs, they would disagree with you vehemently. We built communities on the Iron Range. Our steel making, our mines are who we are and our way of life. For you to come to our nation's capital and offend the people that I represent. Congressman James Oberstar, the transportation director, is rolling over in his grave right now because you are attacking our steel industry in northeastern Minnesota. Our ports depend on it. We support the Sioux Locks. Other cities depend on it. Our steel, we need to support, Mr. Bell, all domestic making steel. Do not separate us. China is our adversary in steel, and you know that. The recycled steel that you support, do you use any Chinese-made recycled steel?
No.
Are you sure? 100%?
Yes.
100% American? Well, good for you. I'm not sure I believe that. Because China has been trying to take us down for a long, long time. They've tried to shut the Iron Range down for a long, long time. All domestic steel we must support. U.S. Steel and Cleveland Cliffs are a backbone of northeastern Minnesota. They support thousands of jobs, hundreds of secondary jobs, $90,000 to $100,000 a year jobs in our steelmaking industry. Please do not come to the United States Capitol and attack our way of life and attack our steel industry. The Iron Range helped us win 2 world wars. We made the steel that helped build America and continue to build America. I will not take a back seat when we talk about steel and we talk about mining. I sit here every single week to have friends on the other side of the aisle try to take away our mining and our way of life. I will not let that happen. Again, we must support all domestic-made steel, and that includes recycling that you support, and I do too. Please do not allow this infighting. China is our adversary. They're trying to dump cheap steel in this country. We need to keep the tariffs on, and I know you support that. Would you please support all domestic making steel? That means on the Iron Range of Minnesota. That is our way of life, our communities, our jobs, our families, as you say, our communities, our cities, our civilizations, as you say. It's our way of life. We do it better than anybody. The jobs and opportunities that mining present in northeastern Minnesota are second to none. And I will share this with you in the last few minutes. Minnesota has the most mineral wealth of any state in this nation with the exception of Alaska. And it's because of our Iron Range. And we have now found the biggest copper nickel find in the world. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Mr. Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Dewitt, you noted in your testimony that nearly 43,000 new construction industry jobs have been added since 2021. Are you making the point that those are tied to the BIL?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, they are. Yeah. And then states have advanced at least one federal aid highway and bridge project in nearly every county across the country as well. That's your testimony, and that's a result of the BIL?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. And the value, you didn't testify to this, but it's in your written. Your value of state and local government projects breaking ground was up year to year, 27% in 2022 and another 9% in 2023. And that's as a result of the BIL?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, yeah, sure, great. Yeah, I just want to underscore the point that this discussion about regulations is one thing, but there's another part of the truth here is that the bipartisan infrastructure law has increased investment in roads, bridges, highways construction. It's increased jobs in that construction. And I say that one of the reasons we have 4% unemployment or lower for the single longest stretch since probably my life is in part because of the investments of the BIL, and I'd like to keep it going. So we've got a chance to do that next year, over the next couple of years when we reauthorize it. So you're making a great case for us to do that as we move forward. And I just want to thank you for that. I want to move to Ms. Osborne. Since 2012, Congress has focused the federal highway program on outcomes and set goals, quote, to achieve a significant reduction in traffic fatalities and serious injuries on all public roads, and to, quote, enhance the performance of the transportation system while protecting and enhancing the natural environment. That's since 2012. That's quoting the law directly. But despite that investment and this renewed focus on traffic fatalities are in fact up, carbon pollution is in fact up, roadway congestion is in fact up. So in your view, how has the administration's regulatory agenda supported those goals or not, for that matter?
Thank you for the question. Congress has not given the administration a lot of authority to steer spending more towards those goals or not. There is really little that the administration could do to orient particularly formula dollars towards those goals. They could use competitive grants even to a greater extent than they do now to do so, reward those who are really succeeding in meeting those goals and steer spending more into the areas that some agencies are struggling with. Like maybe an agency that is really struggling with their safety numbers, competitive grants would only be open for safety projects from that agency. Many of the rules we're talking about today are meant to address safety, and we're just trying to figure out how to do that well. And that's the right conversation to have with the practitioners to get a sense of what the real-world impact of them would be. There's a lot we could do in light-duty vehicle design. We are seeing a larger and larger problem with the fact that drivers cannot see the road in front of them based on the way trucks are designed. Some of the solutions discussed is putting screens in cars so that people would have to take their eyes off the road to see the road in front of them. We would like to see a more practical and logical solution to that problem. And we could help states modernize the way they approach transportation, and particularly performance management. If you look back at the discussion in the 1950s when we were starting the federal program, most people wanted to evaluate the effectiveness of the system based on whether or not people could reach their destinations no matter how they travel, but especially on the newly built roadway system. And we just didn't have the statistics and the data, the technology to do that at the time. Now we have it, and we all carry it in our pockets and smartphones. We have cloud computing that can allow that kind of technology to measure hundreds of thousands of trips in just a couple of hours and really understand how every kind of investment impacts people's access, whether it's reducing congestion, improving transit service, creating more direct vehicle or bike ped connections, and bringing the destinations people need closer to where they live. Seeing something like that could be really transformative.
Thanks, I appreciate it. Before you yield back, I just want to make a note that we've had a hearing a couple weeks ago regarding the use of formula grants and competitive grants and the desire from some to have fewer competitive grants. And everyone's for roadway safety, but, and I don't question that at all, but it does seem you're making somewhat of a case. If we just leave it to formula grants only, there's no guarantee investment will be made in roadway safety, as opposed to if we had competitive grants for roadway safety, we could better encourages a national policy and investment in infrastructure that actually takes into account safety.
It's just one of the few places where reward is possible.
Thanks. Yield back.
Gentleman yields, Mr. Yakum.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of our witnesses for being here today. I'm glad we're continuing our strong oversight of the Department of Transportation, an agency charged with administrating over $1 trillion of taxpayer money that are supposed to be designed to shore up our nation's infrastructure. However, it seems that far too often, a cavernous bureaucracy at DOT headquarters bogs down decisions in red tape, distracts itself with issues outside of its mandate, and they ultimately allow important investments to be eroded away by inflation. I've heard plenty of concerns from constituent stakeholders frustrated by confusing rules, inconsistent grant opportunity announcements, complex applications, and delays in securing grant agreements. One issue I've heard from construction companies in my district is uncertainty around Build America, Buy America requirements. I support Buy America where possible, but it seems like it's becoming a bureaucratic mess. For example, for 2 years in a row, a local road striping company in my district has come in to talk about uncertainty over how the federal government treats the reflective glass beads that are laid on top of paint. OMB ruled that the beads are construction material, while the paint is a manufactured product. If they're pre-mixed before arriving at the job site, it's considered a manufactured product. But they're seldom pre-mixed because it's more time-consuming, more expensive, and it doesn't work in all situations. That's not to mention that different states are applying classifications and documentation requirements differently as well. There are easy fixes for all of this. For example, like getting the administration out of the weeds and out of this bureaucratic mess. But like I said, the constituent company has come in 2 years in a row worried about this issue. That says to me that no one at DOT is in a position to fix this, and they don't seem to be in a hurry to do so. It seems like the federal government is all too content to micromanage these products and create all sorts of headaches for small businesses that are just trying to paint the lane markings on the roads. And that keeps the driving public unsafe during times of day in all weather conditions. Mr. Dewitt, can you speak to some of the issues you're seeing with the Biden-Harris administration's stewardship of the Build America, Buy America requirements?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Representative. First of all, to reiterate, ARTBA fully supports Buy America. The problem is that in the short term, some items are not made in the U.S. in adequate amounts, or they might be specialty items only made in foreign countries for now. While U.S. manufacturing catches up, we have to pay a premium for whatever U.S.-made inventory is available, and that's on top of inflation. If we can't find it, there needs to be a waiver request. Waivers can take a long time for approval, if they get approved at all. Meanwhile, we may have to delay or interrupt work on the project to get the issue resolved. There are dozens of different items considered to be manufactured products. When we think of highway and bridge projects, we usually think of concrete, asphalt, steel, and so forth. But these days, we're using many electronic items, electrical, mechanical units, pumps, lifts, and so on. Think about the ITS systems or rest areas, traffic operations centers, and everything that goes into them. FHWA is proposing that more than 55% of a manufactured product needs to be made in the USA. The problem is that someone like my company as a contractor would have to inventory all of the components that make up the manufactured product and certify where they're made. The manufacturer may not have that information. One example is a generator. Literally, hundreds of small, inexpensive components in there. Someone needs to go through all of those parts, figure out where they're what they're worth and where they're made. The manufacturer's representative selling the generator may not have that information. If the contractor demands it, the manufacturer's rep will just sell the generator to someone else.
Thank you, Mr. Dewitt. And in closing here, I do want to also point out, as my time is expiring, that in terms of some of the grant agreement delays as well, according to the Department of Transportation's own figures, there are only 148 out of 415, or 35%, of raised grants agreements in place for awards that were awarded between fiscal years 2021 and 2023, and it's causing projects to drown in red tape, die on the vine, and being eaten away by inflation. And so I certainly call on the Department of Transportation to get these grant agreements in place so that we can get the money out the door and these projects in place. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I do yield back.
Gentleman yields. Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Bell, you've been subjected to a beat down of proportions that I've not seen as a member of Congress in the last 18 years. And you didn't even have a chance to defend yourself. You were beaten down like a piñata. And so I feel kind of badly about that. And it seems like you were beat down because of your representation of the Steel Manufacturers Association, which in your testimony, you talked about the two ways of production of steel, one being a traditional blast furnace, basic oxygen furnace production method, which is centuries old, extractive, coal-based, high emissions. That's the old way of making steel, and the Steel Manufacturers Association produces steel via a cleaner method, And I suppose it was the extraction that you advocate against in your testimony, with the admonition that we should only have one standard, one emission standard, as opposed to two emission standards. The one that you favor is the one that is cleaner, better for our environment. Would you like to explain a little bit about why that method is best as we move forward in funding initiatives to move our country away from dirty energy and into a more cleaner situation?
Sure. Thank you, Congressman Johnson. The EAF approach to steelmaking embraces the circular economy. What does that mean? That we use recycled steel to make new steel. That means we also use electricity from an energy grid that gets greener and greener every year. And as a result of that, we have a lower emissions profile than steel made the traditional route. But for the purpose of this hearing, what is important to note that when it comes to Federal Highway Administration and General Service Administration infrastructure projects, the integrated blast furnace producers do not make the products you need for federal highway and GSA projects. They don't make them. EAFs make 99% of those products that you use.
Well, I'm going to interrupt you here, and again, apologize that you had to suffer such a beat down, but I hope you feel better about being able to explain a little bit about, you know, why you're here and why you're advocating for your position.
Right, and I appreciate that opportunity. And by the way, Mr. Stauber is a huge advocate for the steel industry. And quite frankly, both integrated producers and EAF producers are the ones that are leading the way globally in cleaner steel production. But again, for the purpose of this hearing, federal highway infrastructure projects, the products that are needed to do those are not made by integrated producers. So the reason we need a single standard is because it's easy to follow.
Okay, all right. I may disagree with you on the single standard concept. But
yes.
Maybe one of my fellow colleagues will allow you to talk more about that. I want to get to Ms. Osborne. Ms. Osborne, considering the alarming statistic of approximately 42,795 road fatalities in the U.S. in 2022, with 12,151 of those attributed to speeding, the Department of Transportation has highlighted the crucial need for safer speeds in its national roadway safety strategy. Could you elaborate on how technologies like automatic emergency braking systems can contribute to promoting safer driving speeds and reducing speed-related fatalities?
I appreciate your question and do want to point out that some of the things we don't even look at is that even going the speed limit is often an unsafe speed, and we don't determine which crashes are caused by speed that actually meet or are under the speed limit, even though that's part of the danger as well. We certainly need to look at ways to get people to comply with speed limits that are often set higher than they should be, but we should be also looking to make it more natural for people to behave the way we want them to by better roadway design that just leads to drivers going the safer speed.
Thank you. With that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields, Ms. Malloy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're here talking about regulation in the transportation industry and building things, and we're a country that used to innovate and build things, and now we just regulate. Mr. Pugh, I'm going to start with you. You said that long-haul trucking is one of the most heavily regulated industries in the country. You also said that truckers are growing frustrated with this administration and all their regulations. If we have a different administration and we can change regulations, what would long-haul truckers like to see stripped out? I think in a post-Chevron world, we're going to be in a situation where Congress is making more of these decisions, and hopefully unelected bureaucrats are making fewer of the decisions, and you have our ear right now. What would you want Congress to know?
I think first and foremost would be this speed limiter rule that's been floated around for the last couple years. Truckers already are way under pressure with hours of service because they're regulated, of course, by the amount of time they can drive and the amount of time they're supposed to take a break. So if you add speed limiters into this, and of course drivers are paid by piecework, so when you add speed limiters in this, it's just putting more pressure on drivers. It's also been proven that inexperienced drivers and newer drivers feel this pressure and oftentimes speed in places that they probably shouldn't be speeding, two-lane roads and construction and stuff like that. So this is just, that's the first probably thing. Flexibility and more flexibility in hours of service would be very helpful, and also an elimination of a rule, and that's the elimination of the overtime exemption for driver pay, because that was put in like 1938. I think it's a little dated. Truckers should be paid for all the time that they work. They give away 20, 30 hours a week plus. Probably that would do better at managing speeds and a lot of other safety-related things that we talk about here and rules that we try to make. But a lot of these things we don't like to do because they're hard. So, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dewitt, same question. What regulations should we be looking at if Congress is making these decisions and not agencies? Sorry,
Thank you,
I caught you off
Representative.
guard.
Excuse me. Congress, including this subcommittee, has done a great job conducting oversight of the infrastructure law so far. But as we're halfway through it, I encourage you to keep up the law as implemented and make sure it is doing everything that's intended to do. Anything that we can do, contractors in general, we like the flexibility, anything that we can have that gives us flexibility, gives the states flexibility, lets us do things in conjunction with the owner, certainly is always a benefit to anything that we can do.
Thank you. Mr. Bell, same question. If Congress is making these rules instead of agencies, what do you need us to know?
I got to tell you, at the SMA, we have a preference for regulatory certainty over regulatory overreach, and we really do believe that anything that Congress does needs to be followed and not circumvented by regulatory frameworks.
I agree. All right, Ms. Osborne, you've had the most time to think about it.
Thank you. I would love to see a reduction of some of the regulations on more innovative roadway designs. When we work with states and local agencies, particularly on attempting more innovative quick build projects to try new interventions, they run into antiquated standards in both the Green Book and in the MUTCD that make it hard to try new things. We regularly hear from roadway design engineers that they would like to do things like narrow lanes in order to make drivers know that's an area they should be going a little more slowly in, but they have to go through very elaborate and long exceptions processes, which slows down their projects and raises the cost of them, and then that's held against the engineers in their performance reviews. So I'd like to make it easier for them to do things that get the results that we want and deregulate some of those designs.
Thank you. I'm about out of time. I just want to wrap up by saying that I'm looking forward to being in a different regulatory framework where we can go back and look at some of these regulations that may have been there since the 30s that don't make sense anymore. So I appreciate your time. Appreciate you answering my question, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields to Mr. Garcia.
Thank you, Chair, Ranking Member, all of our witnesses. We all share the goal of making our highways and transit safer, more efficient, and more accessible. I'm glad to see that the Department of Transportation has made progress toward these goals in rulemakings, but there's plenty of work to do in the upcoming Surface Reauthorization Bill. Before I get into my questioning, I want to mention one such topic, which is the increasing number of truck crashes and fatalities. There has been a 49% increase in truck crash fatalities over the last 10 years. While it's true, thankfully, that in fatalities, this is a small percent of a larger number. FMCSA, most recent data shows over 500,000 truck crashes in 2021. Even though a small percentage resulted in deaths, that still amounts to over 5,000 deaths per year. To those who contend that our insurance minimums do not need to be raised because only a small percentage of cases exceed the minimum, I'd like to ask you to tell 5,000 families who have lost loved ones or sustained lifelong disabilities that they deserve to live in debt because they are part of a statistical minority. On that note, I'd like to reiterate a point Ms. Osborne made in her testimony about the upcoming surface reauthorization bill, that we cannot continue to fund the same systems and expect different outcomes. Ms. Osborne, we're all aware of the 80-20 split that directs the majority of funding towards our highways over our transit systems. But as many transit agencies reach fiscal cliffs and highway congestion continues to worsen despite highway widening projects, it's clear that deprioritizing transit isn't working well for anyone. Question, how could transit parity improve these issues, and what can be done by Congress to address transit parity?
I appreciate the question. We have spent the last 70-plus years building out a strong and integrated highway system, but we have not put the same attention into the other modes of travel. One of our priorities is to invest in the rest of the system, to put the same level of focus on building out a strong transit system, passenger rail system, freight rail system, and bike ped system. Putting more funding towards that effort is important, and especially as we've basically busted the trust fund, since so little of the trust fund is paid for by user fee and really isn't a trust fund anymore. The old rules about who's paying in and where the money should go hasn't been the case really since 2009, and it's time to update our priors there. I'd also like to see, not just on the transit system, but on the roadway system, something I'm hearing repeatedly from folks on the ground, is that this program needs to be a part of the operations and maintenance of the overall system so that we can guarantee we get the most efficient outcomes of our investments.
Thank you. Investing in transit will help mitigate climate change by reducing gashouse emissions. How does the FHWA greenhouse gas rule equip states to reduce carbon emissions, and why is it important for communities that experience disproportionate highway pollution? You've got about a minute.
It's important to provide more sunshine into what agencies' intentions are and to give us a barometer to measure them by. We should not oversell it. It is just a sunshine law. Agencies set their own targets, and if they miss them, there's really no penalty for it. But at the same time, we need not be overwrought about the damage it will do or how it will impact investments. In fact, if you look at most transportation agencies' environmental documents, benefit cost analyses, their models show that expansion of highways will reduce emissions. I don't think their models are very accurate, and we don't really test them or look back to see if they are correct. But considering the fact that they claim it's going to be great for emissions, I'm not sure why they're so concerned about then measuring them.
Thank you so much, Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields, Mr. Nels.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hugh, good to see you. You've been in front of this committee before talking about some of the negative consequences of this speed limiter, this mandate. To remind the colleagues here, the DOT is considering limiting every single truck on the road 60 miles an hour, regardless of what the posted speed limit is. Your experience, you got a lot of experience behind the wheel of a big truck, right? Do you believe this mandate would actually reduce speeding on our roads, or do you think that DOT is ignoring unintended consequences of this rulemaking?
No, I don't believe it's going to reduce. It'll reduce speeding maybe on the interstate highways, but it's not, like I said earlier, more inexperienced, newer drivers, and unfortunately we have this churning all the time in trucking where new people are coming in. It will cause them, and we've seen this, motor carriers use these things now as a driver management tool, fuel management tool. If you look at the data, they're still getting speeding tickets. So
Right.
maybe not an interstate, so it's probably a two-lane road or a work zone.
Yeah, and what does the safety data tell us about the risk for crashes when you have trucks that are, now we're forcing them to travel below the posted speed limit or slower than the flow of traffic? What does the data say? What does it say?
There's plenty of data out there to show, but if there's a 10 mile per hour differential in speeds between traffic, that creates 227% more interactions between cars and trucks, which interactions is where we have accidents.
Aside from the safety concerns related, what does this do to our nation's supply chains? How would that affect it?
What's going to slow our supply chain down? It's actually going to have a reverse effect with congestion because we're going to need more trucks to haul the same amount of freight that we're hauling now. And with that being said, it's going to put more trucks on the highway, which will be traveling 10 mile per hour below the speed limit or more in different sectors, which will again cause more congestion and more accidents.
You're right, thank you. Mr. Dewitt, share with us some of your members' experiences with obtaining Build America, Buy America waivers. My state, here's a good example. In my state, we applied for 2 BABA waivers the end of January, and we still are awaiting approval. We haven't heard anything. How are the other states dealing with this, with the DOTs? How are they dealing with some of this?
I would have to check it to get a more, better answer for all the other states, but I think what I'm understanding is I think everybody's having similar issues with regard to how it is being interpreted. I mean, if you look at this on the Buy America, this is an example from Florida. This is one of our members this is a generator. In a project that he had, he was required to go through and they wanted to understand where every single part in this generator was made, how much it cost, and then how that fits within the system. I think things like that are just, there has to be some common sense applied. I think it would make the most sense on something like that.
Yeah, I agree. We have to stop the silliness. We really, really do. I yield back, sir.
Gentleman yields, Ms. Sykes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Chairman Crawford and Ranking Member Norton for holding this hearing today. Grateful to be able to continue to talk about the transformative impacts of the bipartisan infrastructure law and how we are implementing it with great administrative, sometimes great and sometimes not so great. One thing I would like to talk about as a member of this committee, Ohio, we call ourselves the heart of it all. You can get to most of the country and Canada within an 8 hours drive, but we are also always concerned about the fact whether people are able to travel in and out of our state safely. And want to just make sure, as we're talking about these administrative rules, we are keeping safety in mind. If people are not able to make it in and out of my state as they are traveling through commerce for vacation, for leisure, we really are not doing something correct. But I do want to direct our attention elsewhere for my questions, and specifically around some workforce conversations. So following the enactment of the bipartisan infrastructure law, Transportation for America released an article highlighting the need for workforce development as our nation and our transit systems recovered from the COVID pandemic and the role that the bipartisan infrastructure law has played in the process. One of those programs is the Low and No Emission and Bus Facilities Program. And among the requirements, the No-Low program requires grantees spend 5% of the award money on workforce development training, including apprenticeships and other labor management training programs. So Ms. Osborne, as you've seen these grant programs, such as this one, improve our nation's workforce, or how have you seen it, and what can we do to make it better if it is not already working at the top of its ability?
Thank you for your question. There is greater flexibility in the utilization of federal funds for workforce development than I think a lot of agencies are aware. There's a lot more we can do to not just show them how they might utilize that flexibility, but some of the most effective ways to do so. I think we could do a lot more to share workforce development successes across the country rather than have everyone trying to reinvent the wheel, so to speak, in every place. But one thing we're doing now is analyzing the spending to date across the board in terms of IIJA spending to get a better sense of what we have gotten for expenditures.
Thank you, Ms. Osborne. And if you could elaborate a little bit more about some of the recommendations that you have to improve this so that we can have that information and perhaps act on it?
I am certainly happy to share any lessons we learn in doing analysis, particularly with regard to workforce. I don't have any particular recommendations on that today, but as we finish our analysis, I'd be happy to work with you going forward.
Thank you very much. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Mr. Webster.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it. I think my question is maybe for Mr. Bill. The idea of using lower carbon products in transportation arena is something that's happening, I guess. And I'm wondering, are these products tested for their longevity and kind of the wear and tear of transportation in actual existence when they get incorporated into some job or something? Are they checked for that, do you know, or tested out as far as how well they'll endure the rigors of a construction project?
Yes, Congressman, they are, and they are given information through the Environmental Product Declaration on Emissions and then mill test certificates in terms of their strength and functionality.
So do you believe that other items like glass or concrete or something like that, do they stand up to the rigors of that as well as it does for steel or some other product?
I can really speak only to steel, but one thing that we do know in terms of emissions, glass and concrete and other commodities don't have a dual standard to measure their emissions. But in terms of their strength, I can't speak to that.
So do you know, can you kind of just summarize the impact of adding these items into the mix, something that produces a lower carbon footprint, what that entails? Can you elaborate on that?
Well, I do know that if you measure the embodied carbon emissions of all commodities that are used in federal highway infrastructure projects, I think that that'll be a good thing, because I think that way you'll be able to build these projects with the best carbon footprint possible.
But do you have a kind of a idea of which way, I mean, as far as, you don't just look at that input, you also look at the longevity and endurance and so forth, other things. Are there some tests that kind of prove out what's the sort of a number for that, which includes all those things?
I am not aware of that. I can speak specifically to steel, and I know that they are, but for the other commodities such as glass and concrete, I'm not sure. Okay.
Well, do you think that that would be a good thing to have before we step out into an unknown usage of products until we find out what the longevity of those products would be?
I think it would be good because it would improve our environmental footprint and safety, but as long as it can be done in a way that's not burdensome and that doesn't hinder free markets and follows legislation, I think we'd be in good shape.
Do you think there should be some kind of, not exemption, but maybe lenience towards small businesses and others who might have trouble putting all that together right away? Do you think there should be something that could sort of buy them into the whole program?
I think we should do as much as we can to support job creators, and small businesses are a very important part of that group, and I think that we need to look at that. Again, anything we do needs to make common sense and not be regulatorily burdensome.
Can you name something that is, for a small business, that might be regulatory burdensome.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Can you name a particular product or something provided by a small business that might be regulatorial prohibitive?
I can't name anything right now. I can focus on the steel industry, and we go to great lengths to make sure that we provide the government with the information we need on emissions as well as the product properties of the products we make.
Thank you very much. Yield back.
Gentleman yields, Mr. Auchincloss.
Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate the testimony from our witnesses. Ms. Osborne, I particularly appreciate your work and your testimony. You've noted that while today we are spending more money overall on our roads, the money is not necessarily going towards repair. In many cases, as you note, states are spending as much on expansion as they are on repair. And you rightly point out, and I want to emphasize, that, quote, every new lane mile of road costs approximately $24,000 per year to preserve in a state of good repair. By expanding roads, we are borrowing against the future. As Congress begins considering the next surface transportation reauthorization, how should we reprioritize formula funding to ensure that we are maximizing our existing roads and not expanding and inducing more vehicular traffic?
Thank you for that question. To be clear, the $24,000 per lane mile is a number that we came up with from Federal Highways in 2019. So that's probably awfully low. And the liability of building things has likely become more expensive. This committee actually led the way in addressing this policy-wise in the last reauthorization. There was bipartisan language added to your bill originally that said that an agency could build new infrastructure or expand infrastructure if they had a plan to maintain it throughout its useful life while improving the overall condition of their system. It's something that is just good governance and common sense. Unfortunately, the Senate and the White House did not follow your excellent lead, and I would love to see that language come back in.
There's a lot from the INVEST Act that I would like to see come back in, for sure. You've also noted that our current funding system does not prioritize access, whether that is access to economic opportunity, healthcare, family. The current formula incentives states to simply use more fuel. The current formula incentivizes states to simply use more fuel, not to actually design a transportation system that connects people with the places they need to go. How should we think about reevaluating that formula to prioritize access to jobs and services instead of simply inducing more vehicular miles traveled?
Yes, this is something I am very excited about, and I really think it could be transformative in speaking to the user experience and to access to economic opportunity. For those that are not familiar with multimodal access, it is measuring the destinations people can reach when they travel. The way we measure the success of the transportation system right now is based on a proxy that was the best thing we could do in the 1950s, which is to look at the speed of vehicles within an observed section, assuming that if we sped up vehicles within that observed section, that people would arrive where they were going more quickly. As it turns out, what we do often to speed up that travel actually extends the distance. Think about roadways where you have no left turn all the way down and you have to go out of your way to take that left turn. We can measure that trip now. Virginia has really led the way in this, and in doing so, I think really improve people's experience.
And I'm glad you brought up Virginia. Let's go one level deeper in granularity to describe what it is that Virginia has done to quantify access to jobs and services within sort of a catchment area to help policymakers understand how effective their mobility policy is.
They evaluate all new capacity projects on several items, including access to jobs and access to essential services. They measure those differently because a job trip is expected and okay if it is a little bit longer, and certainly does not it is not treated the same way as, for example, a trip to the grocery. A 30-minute trip to a job is an acceptable amount of time. A 30-minute trip to a grocery is a public policy problem.
So is it modality agnostic in the sense that they
It
say,
is.
regardless of how you get there?
It is not only modally agnostic, it actually brings in distance and land use decisions. So if you move the things people need closer to homes or affordable housing closer to those things, you can get an access increase as well.
And what types of places score higher on this metric? Is it single-family zoned, highway-centric, car-centric planning, or is it walkable, mixed-use downtowns?
On access to non-work necessities, definitely more walkable, mixed-use, traditional communities.
I yield back, Chair.
Gentleman yields. Mr. Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Dewitt, I heard you made the comment about good intentions. We always have a saying around my crowd that the road to the poorhouse was paved with good intentions. A lot of folks have good intentions, but they have no clue about what they're talking about. I think we find that a lot on this side. I want to make another comment, too. In talking with a lot of the people, excuse me, about choke, a lot of people in the construction business, it seems that a lot of your percentage of your costs that you have to put in there is due to permits and the waiting on permits, and the fact that I think that good tort reform in this country would probably decrease a lot of those permit costs and speed up your projects overall. So I'd like for you, if you have a comment, I'd love to hear it, but otherwise I think that's something that would be of great value, not just to your industry, but probably to all industries. So, but what I want to get to is Mr. Pugh. Mr. Pugh, my Baptist in me wanted to stand up and cheer. Congratulations, 2.5 million miles safe driving. People don't realize that's 20 years on the average driver. That only not says a lot about you, but I think it says a lot about where our industry has gone with the availability, the technology out there, and the focus on being safe. I know in my company, we want to be the most technologically advanced, the safest, with the best employees, period. And we have a handful of million-milers out there. I want to focus real quick because there's some things that I've heard up here that I want you to make a quick comment on. Number one, we heard a 76% increase in accidents of 75 miles or over in speed. I don't have a truck out there that runs 75 miles an hour. And if you actually looked at the data, AAA's even done this. They didn't want to admit it, but over 75% of the accidents out there are not the truck's fault. It's the four-wheeler, it's the car, the automobile's fault. With 98% of trucking companies out there, 10 trucks or less, 95% of them are 5 trucks or less. A huge portion are owner-operators and independent drivers. What would this increase that one of the colleagues on the other side of the aisle is pushing for liability insurance, what would it do to the trucking industry?
It would, in short, put them out of business. A lot of the small guys, my members, we don't even know how this will be charged. We don't know how insurance will withstand this because there's really nothing out there to measure. There's already been lots of liability insurance companies leave the market. We know as people leave the market and there's less competition, prices go up. So this could be disastrous to small business, to supply chains, to carriers, even the size of yours.
I think it'll be disastrous for the trucking industry, but it's nothing but a pay raise for trial lawyers. That's all it is.
100%.
Let's move on. Rear impact guards. I would venture to say if we had a question in here, people don't even know what that is. What's a rear impact guard?
It's the DOT bumper, for lack of better terms. If you see a semi-truck going down the road on the back of the trailer, kind of a T-pattern thing or something like that, it's the rear bumper.
So we have those, right?
Yes, we do.
Is a rear impact guard to prevent the truck from injuring the car or from the car hitting the truck and being injured?
To keep the car from entering completely in underneath the truck.
So I think that puts a little more evidence to the fact that the automobiles out there cause the problem. And a lot of times we see that the trucking industry takes the hit.
Trucking industry almost always takes the hit when you're correct. Over 80% of accidents are caused by the car.
So automatic emergency brakes, man, I got a boatload of them I'd love to get rid of. Are they fail-proof?
No, they're not foolproof. We have constant false acts going all the time. Activations.
Go off when you go under a bridge or road construction sign, anything that may,
I drove a truck back from Reno last year back to Kansas City. It was constantly going off for just, there's nothing around. I'm in the middle of Wyoming and places.
yeah, we got federal bureaucracy out there, bureaucrats, federal agencies, people that sit around here that think they know better, have no clue. Guarantee you probably the majority of folks in this room don't have a CDL driver's license. They don't know that industry. But since we're out there on the roadway, in the motoring public, we're an easy target because people see us. I mean, you're scratching your head on what you think you might can get done this year. You're riding down the road, oh, there's a big truck. Let's see what we can do to that as well. I'm so out of time, but I wanted to add one more thing. Broker fraud, it is huge. And it's been going on for decades. But I would like to add in there that we have another fraud going on out there too, and that's the towing industry. The towing industry has been ripping off the trucking industry for decades. I know for a fact, I just saw one, a truck that had an accident by itself, ran off the interstate. The towing bill was $78,000.
I had a member who received a tow bill a couple weeks ago in the state of Pennsylvania. They were charged $9,000 heat and humidity charge with a 10% administration fee on top of that. It was well over a $60,000 tow bill.
Most
Gentleman's time's
regulated,
expired.
taxed, burdened industry in the world.
Gentleman's time's
Sorry I
expired,
ran
Mr.
over.
Carball.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Dewitt, our transportation sector is the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in the United States. Your testimony notes your opposition to FHWA's Greenhouse Gas Performance Rule, while stating that the American Road and Transportation Builders Association, ARTBA, is not opposed to reducing emissions. How can we accurately reduce greenhouse emissions if we don't even measure the scope of the problem and potential solutions? And what specific policies does ARTBA support to lower greenhouse gas emissions on our roadways?
Thank you, Representative. The rule requires state and local agencies to plan projects that meet the intended greenhouse gas goals, and at least minimum to create the declining of the GHG totals. I guess that it means the states and other transport agencies need to prioritize certain types of projects over others, as I had mentioned. If they do not align with the prescribed GHG reduction targets. The concern is that that could lead to a misallocation of resources and hinder state-specific transportation needs from one type of a project to a different type because that specific type it has a lower GHG reduction. And I think the concern is that that is not necessarily doing what the states actually need to have done. They're doing what is needing to be done based upon the greenhouse gas emissions. With regard to reducing the greenhouse gas, I do not have a proposal for that I'm aware of within our association.
Mr. Dewitt, is there anything that ARTBA supports to lower greenhouse gas emissions on the roadways? Anything, something, an iota?
An iota? I'll tell you what, sir, I will do some checking and get back with you if that's okay.
Thank you. Mr. Dewitt, the bipartisan infrastructure law has been a transformative investment for our nation's roads, bridges, and infrastructure. In my district, we have seen nearly $1 billion in federal dollars from the bipartisan infrastructure law, also known as Bill, for local projects. Your testimony highlights that there have been over 75,000 project commitments in the first 2 years of the bill. Since the bipartisan infrastructure law's enactment, 43,000 new construction industry jobs have been created. As the president of a major construction company, how are you seeing the benefits of this law, this infrastructure law, play out across America?
Thank you, sir. The infrastructure law has helped drastically. It has been a true blessing. I think it helps us, it gives contractors some clarity, it gives us some time. It's a 5-year bill, so that lets us go out and expend the money for equipment. It lets us hire people, it gives us the opportunity to grow our projects. I think it is a win-win. It's good for the American people, and that we have the ability to make more efficient, quicker ability to get goods and services to the market, as well as keep people safe. And the more that we put into this, the safer we can make these roads over a period of time.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Mr. Kane.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to all of our witnesses for being here today. In 2021, the FHWA released a memorandum encouraging states to prioritize projects to maintain existing infrastructure facilities before expanding capacity. While this memorandum was subsequently nullified by the FHWA as Congress was beginning its disapproval process, it would have marked a major shift from the long-standing federal-state partnership under which states retained the autonomy to prioritize the projects they needed most. Mr. Dewitt, can you detail for us ARTBA's position on the December 2021 policy memo? What do you see as the importance of states to prioritize projects according to their own needs?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Representative. Longstanding cornerstone of the federal aid highway program has been state flexibility in project selection. That's because transportation challenges in Oklahoma are going to be different than they are in, say, Vermont, and states need that ability to respond accordingly. Putting aside the fact that states are already spending nearly half of the formula dollars on repair and rehabilitation projects, this is another example of the administration trying to work outside the law. We applaud the FHWA for repealing the memo, and will follow the law ensuring state flexibility.
Thank you. Mr. Pooh, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act explicitly required that the Department of Transportation consult with truckers about their experiences with automatic emergency brake systems prior to publishing a motor vehicle safety standard requiring this technology. In fact, truckers are the only stakeholders that were singled out in the law for specific consultation on this mandate. A notice of proposed rulemaking was published in June of 2023. How do you think this consultation process went? And can you speak a little bit more about the process in general?
Yeah, as far as the AAB process, they have not done what they said. They have not reached out to drivers or spoke with drivers at all. Also, since this has come out, the NHTSA has also opened up an investigation on false activations of these products. So they're continuing to move forward with a rule that they know they have a problem with. They know these trucks have these false activations. I've had members, and we've had plenty of comments put out of drivers almost being put in an accident on bad roads and different things like that, and also being rear-ended because these things activate and someone's following too close in a car or something behind them and almost hits or does hit the truck. You know, I can't say this enough. I point this out all the time. Trucks are completely different from cars. And just because a technology works well in a car and an automobile does not mean that it's going to work well in a truck. Every load, every type of truck is different as far as weights and how the product moves and stuff like that. You take a tanker, there's liquid in there moving all the things. So the way you have to stop that is completely different from a load of paper towels in a van trailer. So,
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Mr. Menendez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to our witnesses for appearing here today. New Jersey's 8th Congressional District is home to the largest port on the East Coast. While we are very proud of this asset and all that it brings to our district, and what it does not just for our region, but our nation's economy, we all see an incredible amount of truck traffic through our communities. The port and trucking are both vital to our supply chain and our local and regional economies, but emissions from medium and heavy-duty vehicles emit nearly 25% of transportation-related gas emissions. We also know that transportation is the largest creator of emissions in the United States. Medium and heavy-duty vehicles often operate in densely populated areas such as my district and can have adverse health impacts on the surrounding communities. Sadly, these impacts fall disproportionately on overburdened communities. Ms. Osborne, first, welcome back. But can you tell us, how does the FHA's greenhouse gas performance rule work to reduce emissions along freight corridors and near ports?
Well, I don't want to oversell the rule. It is a sunlight and tracking rule. It is a rule that requires states and metropolitan planning organizations to make clear to Congress and the taxpayer what their intention is in terms of controlling greenhouse gas emissions. If they fail to meet their self-set target, there is nothing that happens. But there is certainly better information to the taxpayer and to policymakers to determine how they feel about that. You can't control something you don't measure. So I think having folks do a better job of indicating what they expect to happen in terms of their investment package, in terms of increasing greenhouse gas emissions, is an essential first step to doing something about it.
And it creates awareness and more information for communities to put pressure on those local actors to try to make those changes in a quicker fashion.
Absolutely, and this is a program where finding good data is very challenging. In every report we've ever written about federal spending, we have very long appendices that talk about the lack of recent data, comparable data, complete data. And so some of these tracking rules can help to provide just basic information about where the agencies themselves think things are going.
I just want to underscore that point because it's so important. There's a group in Elizabeth, New Jersey called Groundworks, and they find unique ways, low-cost ways to collect data about the different challenges that their communities are facing. And so by having that additional data that groups like that don't have to source themselves, they can be even better advocates for their communities. So it's incredibly important, and something that even if there is no enforcement mechanism, I believe is still going to be helpful in achieving some of these goals. Moving on to worker misclassification. Worker misclassification has quickly become a large topic of discussion across all sectors. We've heard quite a bit about independent contractor and employee classification in this committee, as well as the independent contractor classification rule finalized by the Department of Labor at the beginning of this year. Mr. Pugh, we know that the rule will be good for workers. It provides clarity and will help to ensure that workers are not deprived of Fair Labor Standards Act protections like minimum wage. However, some large corporate motor carriers have claimed that the rule will harm independent truckers and owner-operators that want to work as independent contractors. What are your thoughts on what this new rule will mean for truckers and owner-operators that have worked as independent contractors and want to maintain that status?
I feel and we feel that it will not change. If you are in a compliant lease, working for a carrier with a lease agreement, you will be fine, just like you were prior to the last rule being passed. Actually, this rule gives more clarity. It's easier to show that you are independent, in our opinion. And finally, it does away with allowing control, because if you're truly an independent contractor, leased, subleased or whatever to another motor carrier, you shouldn't be controlled as an employee, meaning speed limiters and driver fleet management tools like that must be put into your truck. The prior rule that allowed that, and you could still be considered independent. We don't feel that if you're an independent driver or independent carrier and you have these kind of items, have to have them mandated or put into your truck by the carrier you're leased to. That's a sense of control. This does away with that. So we're good with the new rule.
I appreciate that and wish I had more time, but thank you all so much for coming.
Gentleman yields. As you can see, there is a vote series underway on the House floor. Therefore, we shall stand in recess, subject to the call of the chair.
The Subcommittee on Highways and Transit will reconvene the previously recessed hearing. I now yield to myself for 5 minutes of questioning. Mr. Pugh, good to see you today. Recently, the Supreme Court overturned the Chevron decision that will prevent agencies from ignoring congressional intent, and it takes away the agency's ability to loosely interpret statutes for rules. Just the past 2 years, we have seen some ridiculous rules come down from DOT and other agencies. This includes WOTUS, speed limiters for trucks, greenhouse gas emission rules, just to name a few. Do you think that the regulations that were done based on, that these regulations have been made based on congressional intent?
No, I don't think most of these have been made. Some of these you're talking about congressional intent at all. I think there's certain folks out there who want these kind of things, whether it's to take away a independent or small businesses advantage for a profit or something like that. I mean, the speed limiter rule, that was said, FMCSA said that it will put small business carriers at a competitive disadvantage to large motor carriers. So again, I think a lot of this stuff comes to serve special interest groups who maybe don't have any experience in commercial trucking, or they have it, but they're just on the other side from like drivers and my folks.
Do you think that these rules will withstand a court challenge if they weren't clearly gaining congressional intent?
Well, we'd like to think they won't, but I think with this whole Chevron doctrine and this just passing, I'm not an attorney, I'm a trucker, but I think we have attorneys that work for us, and I think this is going to take 10, 20 years maybe to see how this all plays out, but we'll see.
Hopefully they get overturned. Earlier this year, the EPA finalized its rule titled The Final Standards to Reduce Greenhouse Gas Emissions from Heavy-Duty Vehicles, model year 2027 and beyond. This is phase 3 of the greenhouse gas standards for heavy-duty vehicles. And it will force a significant number of trucks to become electric. Can you expound on how this rule is going to impact your industry?
It's going to devastate our industry. Again, as I said earlier, tractor-trailer trucks are way different than cars, and maybe this technology can be argued it works somewhat in cars, but it's far from mainstream with trucks. Trucks right now, there's nowhere to really fuel them. No one really has a way to address how we're going to recharge these trucks. Small business carriers like myself, I park my truck at my house all the time. So this means when I want to go home or park my truck, I need to put in a very expensive charging system in my truck. Not to mention these trucks weigh 10,000 pounds more than their diesel counterparts, which means they will haul less of a payload, which means by hauling less of a payload, you're going to put more of these trucks out there. And in fact, in my personal opinion, they could have an opposite effect and actually cause more pollution.
Is this technology even available at this time?
Not that I know of. I mean, there's trucks out there testing and the companies out there who've introduced them. But as far as, I don't know any carriers or anybody that's going out and buying these things en masse. Because again, where do you fuel them? There was a trucking company in Illinois that was going to get like 32 units for their company. The city reached out to them and asked them what they were doing because they needed so much electricity. And they told them that they were putting in these electric trucks. And they said, well, you can't do it because your trucks are going to draw more power than our entire city does from the power grid. We don't have the electricity to give you.
Yeah, I think that in general, we have an energy demand problem in the United States. And this, I think, would only exacerbate that problem. My final question is that I understand there's an attempt to impose an additional underride protection requirements on trucks. So we have the rear protection, but this advisory committee looked at it and they're trying to require underride protection on the sides. How do you see that working?
Right now, I don't see it working. First of all, there's not really good data even saying how many of these accidents there are and how much they would prevent. There's not been any real-world testing, and the committee that you're speaking of that they threw together had way more safety advocates on it than it did trucking, and they didn't even come to a consensus at the end of this. And they ignored the facts of railroad crossings and off-road and other operational challenges of these underride guards.
Thank you. My time has expired. I now recognize Mr. Moulton for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Pugh, I'd like to pick up on some of these questions. We were talking about speed limiters and how you mentioned that these are pursued by special interest groups. They can limit the ability of small businesses to compete, according to you. How is that the case? How does it hurt small businesses in trucking to have a speed limiter on your truck?
Yes. Well, we have speed limits. We all know that, and, to oversee.
Yeah, so I know we have speed limits. I'm asking how speed limiters hurt small
Right, but I'm getting that. Let me answer your question. We have speed limits now. Small business carriers like myself, they don't need driver management tools or fuel management tools like these are used by big carriers, these speed limiters. So they can go the speed limit a lot of times where maybe the larger carriers cannot. So the problem is if you put these on a small carrier, that's the one competitive advantage they have is that they can run the speed limit and get these loads there more quickly. If you take that away from them, they've lost all competitive advantages now over their bigger carrier counterparts.
Okay, I understand that. That makes sense. You mentioned that it must be special interest groups or whatnot who are pushing these technologies. In the last year for which we have data available, 20% of fatal truck crashes occurred over speeds of 70 miles per hour, resulting in about 1,000 deaths. Now, if I care about those 1,000 people who died because of truck crashes that could have been prevented with speed limiters, does that make me a special interest guy?
No, I think that we all care about crashes. There's no one in this world who cares more about highway safety than an American trucker. I mean, myself, personally, 2.5 million miles, I'm very proud of that.
Well, if you care about trucker safety, then you shouldn't be so concerned when you have an advisory committee that has a lot of safety advocates on it. Speeding was a factor in 29% of traffic fatalities in 2022, killing 12,151 people. 12,151 Americans who lost their lives due to speeding. In 2019, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration estimates that the economic cost of speed-related crashes was about $46 billion. The economic cost to all of us here in America, $46 billion. Mr. Osborne, does reducing the speed of vehicles have an effect on the chance of fatality in an accident?
Sorry.
Sorry, Ms. Osborne.
In general, when a driver is going at higher speed, their sphere of vision decreases, so they're less likely to spot potential points of conflict. And the faster they're going, the less physics allows them to slow and stop their vehicle fast enough. When you hit another vehicle, or particularly a person at high speed, it is more likely to result in serious injury or fatality, especially as vehicles are getting bigger.
And of course, we just talked about the effect of, the value of speed limiters. It's a technology that's been introduced in Europe with no unintended consequences so far as the studies show. It's a technology that's already been adopted by many truckers here in the United States. But bringing it back to the pedestrian level, which you just mentioned, Ms. Osborne, research shows that a pedestrian is twice as likely to be killed by a vehicle traveling at 30 miles per hour compared to a vehicle moving at 20 miles per hour. So we're going off the highways here with truckers speeding and down to the local level, but how can we encourage these slower speed limits to increase road safety, to literally cut fatalities in half for crashes at that speed?
Well, roadway design speeds are often different than speed limits. We design our roadways to accommodate higher speeds than the speed limit theoretically allows, and drivers pick up on that design more than they pick up on the speed limit because you see the speed limit sign every half mile or so, but the design of the roadway is communicating with you all the time.
That makes a lot of sense.
If you build the roadway widely, you get high-speed travel.
That's helpful. We're running short on time, so I want to get to a couple more things. Between 1993 and 2017, we increased freeway lane miles by 42%. Congestion delays grew during that same period by 144% over the same period. Ms. Osborne, do you believe that increasing highway capacity helps improve congestion?
Looking at the record, it does not seem to. We find that in all of the 100 largest cities in the country, even the ones who had a reduction in population and an increase in lane miles saw their congestion go up. So we are clearly messing with the wrong lever.
Everybody knows this outside the United States of America, it seems, or maybe outside of this committee. It's a really important fact. Increasing highway capacity increases congestion. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Mr. LaMalfa for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Pugh, we're talking about disparity of speed limits when you're on, we've all been on the freeway, and especially if it's 2 lanes going one direction, 2 lanes the other. And so I call them turtle races. I guess that's maybe a common phrase or not. So you got one truck passing another truck, and they're stuck going 55 on that particular piece of freeway while cars can go 70. So talk a little bit about the difference in speed and what that does with drivers, as frustration, and then also just the disparity in speed of how that dynamic acts with safety in general. Whereas if the trucks are able to go the same speed, let's say they can all go 65 or 70 like in some states, what's the safer situation?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, there's plenty of data out there to show that a 10-mile-per-hour differential between trucks and cars creates 227% more times that they interact. Interactions, of course, is where we have accidents. If we are really concerned about speed, and as I was talked to prior to you, if we really want to do something about it, instead of differentiating the speed between cars and trucks, then lower the speed for everybody so everybody's going the same. That's all we want. That's what trucking wants, is cars and trucks. So if you're going to limit trucks to 60, then limit cars to 60, because it's proven over and over and over that all traffic traveling the same speed limit is the safest. We're down to 7 states now, I think, in this country that have different speed differentials. I also think that a state probably should be deciding their speed limit, not an agency here in Washington, D.C., because I feel like Montana probably has a better idea than Washington.
I'm from California, and we have a disparate speed. They're 55 and 70 typically on I-5 I use a lot. And if we leave it to California, it'll probably just get dumber, but we'll see. Speak a little bit about the availability of trucks with these mandates going with EPA, joining with CARB to basically outlaw diesel engines by a particular timeline. And then going to much heavier. You said 10,000 pounds more? I've seen as much as 16,000 pounds additional weight by 2 sets of batteries on a truck, which is 1/5 of the gross weight of a vehicle at 80,000 pounds, additional weight. Now you take the diesel engine and the tranny out, and you probably have a different rear axle if they're all going to be driven at the wheels, I suppose. So you're not really taking that much weight off the truck when you add all that electric. So anywhere 10, 15, 16,000 pounds more weight, as you mentioned, we need 20% more trucks to do the same work. Does that seem about right as far as the gross weight?
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I pulled a flatbed the majority of my career, hauled a lot of Mr. Bell's steel here and out of the Ohio Valley, and we got paid by the weight. So not only would I be able to haul less steel at one time, I would make less money because I wouldn't be able to haul as much of a payload.
Well, and the steel guy's got to pay 5 trucks instead of 4 to get it hauled, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So now talk about availability of, especially to smaller trucking outfits. Like on my farm, we got used trucks, and they're on the older side, except for where the state has said I can't run my 2003 anymore. So I had to have them 2011 and newer. But what does it mean when mom and pop truckers are going to be mandated to have vehicles that they can't afford because they have to be a certain tier, a certain timeline? Emphasize that a little bit, would you please?
That means these folks are probably going to go out of business, which is going to have another direct effect not to highway safety because you're taking some of the safest operators off the road. These people who, like myself, who own their own trucks, have their own businesses, most of them run used equipment. They don't want to buy new equipment. For one, the used older equipment, as you well know, is much more dependable. You can get along with it better and you can work on it yourself, and it's very expensive to own and operate
The
it.
average farmer trying to fix this electronic gear on a truck they only get to use 5,000 miles, 10,000 miles a year, or even, the guy that hauls hay for us here, they don't put that many miles on, so a used truck that has 400,000 when they buy it is pretty useful to them. So lastly, this comment here that the more lane miles you add, the more congestion you get. So does that mean we're going to have less congestion if we tear out lanes on the highway? You want to take a stab at that, Ms. Osborne, as well as Mr. Pugh? Because that just doesn't compute for me, is that let's make it one lane. We ought to have zero congestion, right? How the heck does that work?
Sometimes we do see traffic evaporate as we shrink our roadways and shrink the footprint. I'm just reporting on the facts. I'm looking back at federal data.
Traffic will evaporate if you make the roads smaller.
We have seen that occur when highways come down and a lot of reconnecting.
Is this because you frustrate people so much they don't even want to use it?
Oh, because it's just the principle of choosing the best path. People will choose different times of day rather than taking discretionary trips during the most congested hours, things like that.
So like if there was less restrooms, would there be shorter lines for the restroom?
Well, I love your restroom example because it's like saying I should have 7 bathrooms in my house because I'll have a party one time of the year and I need to make sure no one stands in line.
Has traffic all the time. You have people going in and out for entertainment, moving products and all that. I can't believe we're sitting here saying that the more miles we tear out, the less congestion we're going to have with a growing population.
The results of more miles have not been good.
Pardon?
The results of our strategy have not been effective.
Well, if we're have more and more demand faster than we build, that might be one thing, but tearing out, anyway, I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman. That's all I can do.
The chair recognizes Mr. Van Drew.
Thank you, Chair. You know, instead of implementing the mandates guaranteed in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration is moving forward with a proposed speed limit mandate. This rule would potentially limit trucks over 26,000 pounds, and I don't have to tell you all, you know this already, to a single top speed of 60 miles an hour through the use of an electronic engine control unit, which is called ECU. That will be capable of governing a truck's speed regardless of the speed limit. On top of this, the Biden administration has been fast-tracking their woke climate change agenda, which is leaving the American people and the transportation industry dangerously vulnerable. It's going to create a lot of problems in the future. In the next 10 years, the administration's goal is to force more than half of the people into electric vehicles, but our power grid can't take it. It's unreasonable. It doesn't make sense. It's not an all-of-the-above approach. And it's not ready for this rushed implementation, which is purely for the sake of politics. And I've always believed that good politics is good government. Well, this is bad government, and it's bad politics. Our grid was never designed to support a fully electric economy, and the push far outpaces the demand for electrification. A recent study commissioned by the Clean Freight Coalition stated that the price to build out the supporting charging infrastructure to fully electrify the trucking industry, everybody ready for this, would cost $1 trillion. Not $1 billion, $1 trillion. A large burden of that cost being borne by who? Trucking fleets. And again, of course, if the trucking fleets are absorbing it, who is really ultimately going to be placed in the chopping block here? The American consumer. They're going to pay the price. And I'm telling you, Americans, American citizens, American consumers are getting tired of it. They're tired of politicians coming up with crazy plans to fulfill their political agenda that accomplish nothing and worse yet, actually hurt. And to the end of the day, both groups are going to pay more, and all the money that goes to this faceless entity that does nothing to help the American consumer or the trucker. And I would maintain the trucker and the American consumer are in this together, and they're in lockstep, because if the trucker gets hurt, the consumer gets hurt. Mr. Pugh, the trucking industry moves 72% of the nation's freight with slim margins, again, as you know better than I do. What will be the impact to the trucking industry and, most importantly, the consumer if you're forced to electrify on the current timelines and the current proposals?
Yes, thank you. And if I may, the American trucker is getting a little tired of it too, just like the American consumer. They're tired of being the guinea pigs for all this stuff that comes out of EPA. We were the guinea pigs in 2008, we were the guinea pigs in 2011, and we're going to be the guinea pigs again. And what's happened every time we've been a guinea pig is a whole sector of our industry got wiped out because they couldn't afford this, either couldn't afford it, or once they got it, it didn't work like it was supposed to, and they couldn't afford the maintenance to maintain it and to keep these kind of trucks on the road. Truckers want clean air. We all want clean air and clean water. But let's let the free market figure this out. Free market always does better than government heavy-handedness.
Absolutely, you're absolutely right. And I just want you to know that I believe the majority on this committee supports the truckers, supports the hard work that you do. I mean, Americans support it, because guess what? If you're not there moving goods across this great country of ours, the American people are the ones that are going to suffer, and they know how hard you work. It's a hard job. It's not easy, and we appreciate it. There's also been legislation introduced to Congress that would increase the minimum required liability insurance level for motor carriers by more than 500%. Not 5%, not 50%, 500%. From the current levels of $750,000 to $5 million. This is obviously a tremendous increase that I suspect would have a major impact on trucking companies, especially the smaller ones. This is a country of small businesses, but we keep, when I say we, I don't mean all of us in Congress, but there are some folks that keep forgetting about the basis of this country, which is hard-working men and women who are small businesses. So for once, we don't, again, do something to help the small businessmen, but maybe the one time we will. Can you explain, Mr. Pugh, how the current system is working and what the effects of these proposed changes would have?
Yeah, I mean, the current system is working pretty well. There's been plenty of studies come right out of Washington that over 99.4% of all accidents are covered with what the $750,000 it is today. That's $750,000 just for history. That was just sort of pulled out of the air. It wasn't like they did a study or anything to come up with it, and it continues to work and it's covering. I don't think there's too many laws or regulations here that come out of Washington, D.C. that cover 99.4% of all things. And the other 0.6%, they said there's no amount of money that could cover it. If you raise these minimums 500%, this is nothing but a sellout to all the trial lawyers who've got the billboards all up and down the highways saying, sue trucker, sue trucker, sue trucker. Can't go anywhere without seeing these billboards, sue. You're in a truck accident, sue. We forget that over 80% of these accidents are caused by the car, and the cars never carry enough insurance to cover the loss of the trucker. Nobody wants to talk about that.
It's all you see on TV, and I'm going to wrap up with this. American people are tired of it. Of course, the truckers are tired of it. And you know what? I don't mean to be crude here, but we're tired of the hard-working average American in whatever job consistently being screwed by politicians. Thank you for your work. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. We've concluded our round of questions here, but I would allow a second round of questions for anybody that wishes to. I'll have one myself. I recognize myself for 5 minutes for others that would like to as well. Let me come back to the automated devices. I'm going to focus this on Mr. Pugh once again here. Now, in my personal life, I get really tired of getting gonged at all the time because I left the key in the ignition, or I'm driving around my fields there and I don't have my seatbelt on, so I'm jumping in and out and irrigating. And you can't shut the damn things off, you know? The dealer says, oh, it's a safety thing. Like, well, you know, I have enough of a brain to figure out when I can do it safely or not. But we're not given that credit, and especially as truckers who put in lots of miles many, many miles as professionals. So more and more things are being done to take away their discretion and their ability, especially mom and pop truckers that are maybe not covering the vast majority of miles or hours doing so. So you got, again, we're talking about automatic emergency braking systems, the speed limiters we talked about, ELDs, which are not very highly favored by the smaller truckers, and then truck shutoff devices that automatically shut the truck off after reaching hours of service limits. Now, nothing mankind makes is perfect, and so these systems can all glitch. I have to wonder about, and we're seeing this on automobiles, cars and pickups, that they glitch, and you got automatic braking if it detects you're too close to another car, and so you're driving along, and the car's jerking on you, trying to do things automatically for you. And people aren't perfect, but neither are the devices. So, Mr. Pugh, talk about, in a scenario I've heard about, is that with the automatic emergency braking systems, what if you're driving an 80,000-pound rig in an icy condition and something detects that we need to jam on the brakes? What does that do to upset the control of the truck in that situation, or others that you know of that you can tell the committee here today?
Yes, thank you. Yes, in short, it'll put you into a skid if you're not real careful or don't know what you're doing. That's where I point out the fact, as I said earlier, cars are much different than trucks. Trucks way longer. It's 65, 70 feet long. The tires are bigger, where the wheels, the tires are at on the road at the time. Then you add in the different kinds of loads. If you're hauling a low load or a piece of some pipe or something, it doesn't stick very high on your trailer. You have a lower center of gravity. That handles completely different if you're hiring a giant single coil that weighs 50,000 pounds and 6 feet tall, but only 4 feet wide. You're very high center of gravity. It's easy to tip. Put liquid into the mix. If you pull a tanker, I pulled a tanker for a little bit. I jokingly said it felt like you're on a boat all the time, because as you're going down the highway, that stuff's in there sloshing. Now, you're on an icy road, and you hit the brakes, or they automatically just lock up, and that chemical or something that's in that tanker comes forward, it's going to put you in a heck of a situation. You're going to be passing yourself.
The trucker is thinking about that load as he's going, whereas the automatic device just wants to be automatic, right? And
yeah, I mean, as a trained trucker,
effect of a liquid and such.
And in my opinion, as a trained trucker, and this is what we should be looking at, is training truckers instead of coming out with all kinds of electronic devices to dumb down the industry. Let's train the people behind the wheel to drive the truck. I hauled frac sand for a long time down West Virginia in the mountains. You have to know what you're doing to drive off-road and go up the side of a mountain. I mean, I was pulled up the side of a mountain with a dozer. It was so steep. You can't make computers, in my opinion, that can do these kind of things. And you know what? We all forget, and you said it yourself, Congressman, computers have bad days too. I can't get my freaking phone to sync to my 2022 Ford pickup truck half the time. Now, I think that's pretty basic technology, but it doesn't work a lot. But now we want to put all these things into trucks and say, hey, you're safer now. We teach pilots to fly the plane before we teach them to fly the plane with all the technology.
Well, we
Let's
had an
teach
issue
truckers to
with
drive a truck.
737s that they had too much gadgetry on there they're relying on instead of the pilot knowing how to fly the plane. And I wholeheartedly agree with you on that, the more automated it is, the easier it is for people to get lazy on automobiles. Truckers are pretty disciplined, but talk quickly about the automatic shutoff devices for reaching hours of service. Now, since these things can glitch, my tractors glitch, my combines glitch, I mean, what kind of scenario would you see of a possible engine shutoff because it reaches hours of service while somebody is still actively driving? What's the possibility of that?
To be clear, Congressman, I don't think there's really a device that shuts your truck off because you're nearing out of service. You do have the ELD in your truck, which keeps track of your hours of service. And what that will do is once you go over, it's going to flag you in violation. Right. Where that becomes a problem, if I may, is drivers every day are left with this decision on whether they can park their truck in a safe place to take a break, or be in violation to try to find a safe place. We saw a tragic accident in Illinois 6 months ago where a bus hit a truck that was illegally parked. That trucker had to make that decision, and he was tired, so he pulled off on that ramp to get a break because we don't have enough parking in this country. I drove by that ramp last week going back to Kansas City from my home in Ohio visiting family. That ramp on Sunday morning at 8:30 in the morning, there was 10 trucks down that ramp and out along the side of the highway, that same ramp, because we still have nowhere to park these trucks.
I've seen them, yep. And then we still have the problem, are they carrying a hazardous product or livestock that, they got caught in traffic and they need an extra bit of time? There isn't that discretion to get to a location that's safe or be able to offload the livestock. Sometimes you need an extra hour, and then the rules come down so hard upon them. So in general, what we're hearing is that and close on this, Mr. Pugh, that we have a general regulatory direction that seems to take away the ability of the individuals to make good decisions, make safe decisions, because the government's overriding and a device is overriding. Is that the general feel of your drivers, of your industry?
Yes, I think that's a general feel. I think my drivers would like to start seeing common sense regulation that's coming from experienced truckers, and instead of making regulations on a false, fake driver shortage narrative, which we've seen over and over and over, that's where this electronic stuff is, because we keep saying we have this driver shortage that we don't have. We have a training shortage, we have a parking shortage, we have a pay shortage. We don't have no driver shortage. So let's keep people in this industry. Let's listen to the people who do the job.
Yep. I've violated my own timeline here, so I better yield back to the committee here. I appreciate the answers. And so with that, I don't see anybody else here who wants to go for a second round. So no further questions from the committee. We'll conclude our hearing for today. I'd like to thank all of the witnesses for being here and for your testimony. With that, the committee stands adjourned.